I think guys are really hurting, and they're hurting because we're disconnected. We're disconnected from ourselves, and we're disconnected from others. We're disconnected from nature. Maybe we're disconnected from our creator. That's how desperate we are, because we're so isolated that we think we're the only ones having these problems.
By offering men an opportunity to come together in a group, you're providing a roadmap, basically, to find that wholeness again.
What I realized years ago working with guys is I could say that to you and ask you an emotional question. If you were the average guy, you'd try to find the closest door out of the room. When we can find someone that's downregulated and feels safe, we downregulate. We become more relaxed. And that's what we create with these men, are these safe, emotionally safe environments where they can start to learn this, because so often, going all the way back to our childhood, we didn't have that.
Yeah, Owen, thanks so much for joining me on the Mark Divine Show. And thank you for being here in person. I really appreciate that.
It's my honor. I'm glad I found your place.
I know, it took a little while. It's funny, when I saw your email come through, I called the number and it actually didn't go through. It just said number not available.
Oh.
Well, maybe you typed in the wrong digit. But anyways, I'm glad.
I'm dyslexic, so that's probably the case.
I walked around the corner, I just saw the one guy who was wandering, looking like he was looking for something. I was like, oh, that's got to be Owen right there.
That's the story of my life, wandering and looking for something.
We're all looking for something, aren't we? Well, gosh, man, you've been working with men since, 50 years almost, you said.
Almost 50 years. Short story, I got out of college in the early 70s, ended up in Boulder, Colorado. Ended up living with a group of guys. One of them was an attorney that gave up his law practice to become a Rolfer, which is this kind of body work.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Rolf. I've gotten that. Very painful process.
Yeah, well, he convinced me to try it. And after one session, I was sold and spent 4 years in Boulder, where the school was, learning Rolfing. And at that time, that's where all the somatic psychotherapy was developing.
That's right. What's the name of the school again?
Oh, the Rolf Institute.
Oh, the Rolf Institute.
Then it was a Comey. Well, that was Ron Kurtz. He was like in the forefront of developing somatic psychotherapy. Peter Levine, which a lot of people know about.
I'm familiar with Peter.
He was a friend and one of my original teachers, and it sort of went on from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to come back and talk about somatic work, because I think it's so important and useful. From Rolfing to working specifically with men, tell us about how that happened.
Spent 4 years in Boulder, moved down to Phoenix, ended up starting a Rolfing practice. It became an integrated medical clinic.
Okay.
And we were building a large medical
You're
clinic.
not a doctor, though, right?
No, I'm not a doctor, but I had docs working for me.
Okay.
And we were going to build a large clinic called the Scottsdale Institute for Health and Medicine. Andrew Weil was going to be our medical director.
Nice.
And
amazing.
Another one of those business things that sort of went sideways at the 11th hour.
Right. Exactly.
and I sort of got burnt out in Phoenix with another partner. I was doing a mindfulness-based stress reduction company. That was a great company. We helped a lot of people. It wasn't a moneymaker, but it was great helping people.
Was that the 8-week course?
Yes.
Yeah, I went through that a couple of times, actually.
Yeah, and we were like the first company ever doing it, because it was like in the early 90s.
Did Kabat-Zinn develop that, or was that someone else's?
That was John Kabat-Zinn.
John Kabat-Zinn, yeah.
So we did its professional training. And
right. Well, that's cool.
And then, so I just realized that, I'd healed a lot, and we can talk later about that, but I hadn't really healed my ability to be in relationships, at least in a successful way, with women. I go, well, maybe I should work with men. I don't want to work with men. That was a sign of, maybe I should do it.
Yeah.
So I called up an old friend of mine in D.C. that I knew he knew something about men's groups. He gave me a lead. I did a training. So I started my first group in my clinic, and it was mediocre, but it laid a seed in me. And in the course of another 10 years, I did some other groups. But in 2005, I said, look, I like the concept, but that traditional model for men's groups and men's work wasn't working for me. And I don't know
therapeutic model wasn't really
therapeutic
working.
And it was sort of a top-down model. And all of my somatic training said, and working with guys one-to-one, I think if we approached it somatically, guys would get into it quicker, they'd get more out of it, and it would work. And so I created a new model, asked 11 guys, they all said yes. And that was 20 years ago. And this Sandpoint men's group, and from Sandpoint, Idaho, is going strong. We've had over 500 guys in the group. We have now like 6 groups, and I'm in one of the groups, which is an expat group. It's a Zoom group for guys who have moved out. And that was really the seed for everything else I created.
Oh, that's interesting.
Hi, Mark Divine here from SEAL Fit. After 2 years of development, I'm super stoked to announce the launch of SealFit supplements and our first product, SealFit Electro Greens. This is the highest quality organic greens you can find, combined with electrolytes into one powerful supplement. Take with 8 ounces of water in the morning or add to your smoothie to get your day kicked off right with the proper nutritional supplementation and hydration support. And you can also use it as a pick-me-up booster during the day or after a workout. It dissolves immediately, and believe it or not, it tastes great. I've had many testimonials already saying it's the best tasting greens that they have ever tried. So hoo-yah, SealFitSupplements.com, or you can find it on Amazon by searching for SealFit Electro Greens. Hoo-yah. Let's do this. Divine out. That is delicious.
So what are the major issues that you find with these men in these groups, and maybe how have you seen that change over the years?
I was the poster child in this. I mean,
you were the creator and the client, right?
I certainly was.
Totally. I feel the same way with Unbeatable Mind. Like I am a deep practitioner of what I preach.
And I really needed it. And what you might not know about me, I mean, I grew up with dyslexia. I grew up with Asperger's. I didn't know all of this until graduate school, after graduate school. But understanding that I had Asperger's, then I understood why I had such a problem relating to people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd healed a lot of that. So the somatic
Can you
work.
describe what Asperger's, what the symptoms are?
So now they call it being on the
spectrum, right?
Right. So I remember hearing an NPR story about it, and I go, that sounds like me. So I looked it up.
You're like,
and I went through the list. If there was a dozen things in Wikipedia, I had at least 10 of them. And some of them had improved, but like one of them was that you were the little professor. So as kids, you're not really into many things, but there's like one thing you're an expert on.
Right.
And you often have a really high vocabulary. You get sort of become that geek. So a lot of the geeky entrepreneurs, have Asperger's or on the spectrum. So I had all that. My penmanship was bad. I was often socially awkward. Mm-hmm. I'd be putting my foot in my mouth. I still do that.
Gee, maybe I've got it too. Seems to be a
so
problem.
I was just emotionally, uptight. So when my body relaxed, a lot of it opened up, but I didn't have the skills.
Do you think is it genetic Asperger's, or the spectrum, or is it something related to childhood trauma, or?
I think it's all that. I think there's probably some genetics, probably more epigenetics.
Yeah, right.
I think it's more that. My father was quite creative, and he was, I think, a little dyslexic. He was left-handed, so maybe there was some genetics there. I think in my case, it was, I had good parents, but they're both emotionally repressed. There was no real emotional expression. So I think that was a part of it. Mm-hmm. I think, maybe because of my dyslexia and how I struggled in school and got picked on in elementary school, all that just added or compounded that thing of just being locked down. And when I started to try to communicate with people in a more intimate way, like women in romantic relationships, it wasn't working. And I remember, and I talked about this in my TEDx talk, dating this woman. She was a wonderful woman. We're sitting on my couch, and she says, "Owen, I don't feel you." And I go, and I explained to her why she should. And she goes, "Owen."
You went to put the professor's hat on.
Exactly. And so I'm giving her all these reasons. I wasn't arguing. She wasn't being mean. She was really being compassionate. She's saying, "I don't feel you." And suddenly I heard what I was doing or saw what I was doing. I was being rational. I was being logical. So I saw that, but I didn't know what to do.
Right.
But that was the catalyst for me to get into men's work, because I realized then that I need some training on, in how to relate to people in this emotional way, because I never learned how to do that. I certainly didn't learn it from my parents.
I don't know if any guy learns how to do that.
That's what I realized.
I certainly haven't gotten any specific training, besides stuff that we've created for Unbeatable Mind. You were shut down and all left brain logic, linear thinking. So what worked for you? Let's talk about what worked for you to help kind of open you up and give you that emotional kind of awareness.
Well, fortunately, unfortunately, because yes, you would think I was, I would be logical, but being dyslexic, I wasn't really good at logic, math, linear thought. Like I probably gave you the wrong phone number. I do that kind of stuff all the time. So I was cursed with that, but that ended up being a blessing, because I think if I didn't have that course, I would have really developed my intellectual capacities and gotten further away from my emotional capacities.
Interesting.
So I couldn't do what most guys would have done. So I was desperate. I was left with, all right, I have to work with this. And I just started doing everything I could. And I did a lot of things, and I started seeing changes.
And it was the somatic work, do you think, that had the biggest effect?
I think it certainly did in the beginning. Like I went through the Rolfing series, which is usually 10 sessions once a week. 9 months later, I was an inch taller and just short of 20 pounds lighter.
Really?
And I wasn't fat.
Just from the Rolfing?
I had these huge, thick legs that, my friends would tease me because I didn't walk in high school. I waddled. That's how tight I was.
Huh.
And so when the physical tension left me, a lot of the emotional tension, not all of it.
Right.
So that was the entree into, I guess there's something there between the body and the emotions. And so I started doing all these more body-oriented therapies or energetic therapies.
Describe Rolfing.
So Rolfing was developed by Dr. Rolf. She was a biochemist. She realized that one of her sons, had problems. No one could help him. And so she started working with him, and he got well, and she started working with others, and it just sort of took off. And what she realized was that we store our chronic stress or trauma in fascia. And fascia is that connective tissue that holds everything together. It becomes scar tissue or the gristle and meat.
How did she have the insight that we store that in our fascia?
Some of the science was there. Later on, Hans Selye, who wrote the book on stress of life, said that fascia was the organ of stress. But she just sort of saw it from working with people that when the fascia released, sometimes it'd be emotional releases right on the table. And I've had them myself and with my clients. But usually it'd be gradual. And it was like we store our mental stuff in our mind. And this culture is so mentally oriented that we think we store everything in our mind.
Right.
And that's sort of a digital record, but we store like the analog of our emotional stress history in our body.
Right.
And so when you can manipulate it and get it to release, and that's the key, get it to release, you will have the analogous release on an emotional level and sometimes other levels.
Now, I always thought, I mean, said that the emotions are stored in the tissues, but I never actually knew it was the fascia. Even after doing the Rolfing, my Rolfer never explained that. That's fascinating. Do you have any clue how the fascia acts as the emotional memory bank?
I have some friends or colleagues of mine that are Rolfers and scientists, and they in the last 10 years it's gotten real popular to study Rolf or study fascia. I remember Rolfing these surgeons. They say, we're not interested in fascia. I go, yes, you are, because if you didn't have it, you couldn't tie someone together.
Yeah, it holds everything together, right? It's like the outside of the balloon of the body, right?
I think we just started to realize that, the fascia holds it together, and it's also the conduit for the acupuncture meridians.
Right.
Not the nerves, but the fascial system. And so when we have constriction, it just tightens up. So what I found in the years of Rolfing all these people, from, elite athletes to the average guy, was most of our attention is not physical. It's emotional. And what I realized years ago working with guys is I could say that to you and ask you an emotional question, Mark, and if you're the average guy, and you're not, but you'd like try to find the closest door out of the room.
Right.
But if I asked that or talked about it in terms of stress, you talk to me, because guys get really proud about how much stress we endure.
That's right.
And so I started having these emotional conversations around stress and talk to them about, you're storing your stress in your body, and tell me where your stress comes from. And, and they start talking about it, and gradually they start telling me their emotions. So that was really the core of, what I've created for men in terms of these groups and these businesses, is really working with their emotions through the physiology.
So there's a lot of research on polyvagal theory and understanding, growing awareness of the power of the vagus nerve to release stress or to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Can you tell us about kind of what's the cutting edge research, and how does a listener, leverage that knowledge to reduce the stress in their life?
Well, the guy that developed polyvagal theory is a really brilliant man. He's a scientist and a really loving man. His name is Stephen Porges. We just had him on our program.
Nice.
And he realized that we have this vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve of the body, the 10th cranial nerve. And traditionally it was thought that, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight.
Right.
But what Peter Levine turned me on to, and Peter Levine was a scientist and really a therapist that developed somatic experiencing, which is sort of the state of art of trauma work. And he was originally a Rolfer, and Dr. Rolf said, "You really can't be a Rolfer, Peter. You're too small." So he went and got a couple of PhDs from Berkeley, and then went on to do his own thing.
Right.
But I think it was 1980. He was at a Rolfing conference, and he explained his theory, and I even get chills now thinking about it. He was the first man to explain to me, and really everyone else in the audience, what the freeze response is. And now more people know about that. So when a mammal can't run or fight, we freeze. And we're hardwired to do that. It's a reptilian skill. I mean, the reptiles, that's all they have. And so we still have that. And that's where Stephen Porges came in. He realized that was like the first thing in our evolution. And then we developed
So
fight
freeze
and flight.
before fight or flight. Interesting.
He went on further to say that in this ventral, the front part of the vagus nerve, we have this ability to co-regulate or socially down-regulate. So, I look at you, you're relaxed, you're smiling, your eyes are open, you're light in your face, you're telling me you're safe. And so I unconsciously picked that up. Now I'm probably telling you I'm safe, so you picked that up. So we are genetically wired to read this in other animals and each other. So when we can find someone that's downregulated and feels safe, we downregulate. We become more relaxed.
Right.
And that's really, I know you know that. I know you've had a lot of experiences with that. And that's what we create with these men, are these safe, emotionally safe environments where they can start to learn this. Because so often, going all the way back to our childhood, we didn't have that.
What role does breath work play with polyvagal theory and relaxation response?
I think as a therapy, it can be very successful, but even simpler. And as you know, I mean, the breath is the interface between the autonomic nervous system, which is that nervous system that we don't control, and the one that we can control. And so when we can adapt our breath, we will affect the autonomic nervous system. And so we can downregulate, we can take a sympathetic or stress state with breath and start to relax ourselves. And I think what's happening beneath that is that when we start to become aware of our body, just aware of it, and when we start to slow our breath, particularly relax our belly, which turns on the parasympathetic, we're telling ourselves that we're safe.
Right.
And when I think I'm safe, I start to relax. Because when I am not thinking I'm safe, when I am oriented to the world in terms of what's the threat out there, I am not aware of my body. And if I'm running from the cougar that I probably could never outrun, and I injure myself, I'm probably not even going to feel it because I am so aware of the threat that I'm not aware of my body. So when we can slow down through breath work, mindfulness, or whatever, and be aware of our body, we tell ourselves we're safe, which is really, I think, what starts to change the autonomic nervous system.
So this is brilliant. So you work with men who would have a reluctance to talk about their emotions or their problems or whatever. You approach it just through stress management and making them calm down. And then that just naturally brings out the conversation about what's not working, and you start to work on those specific issues.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, we'll do trainings with 60 guys in the room. We'll have a big circle. We do like a check-in. The rules of engagement here is you're going to get you're going to be acknowledged for the risks you take, your vulnerability. Yeah, so a couple of guys sort of say who they are, and they say that little thing, and then one guy goes, and he reveals something that's vulnerable.
Right.
And almost always to his amazement, rather than get shamed, which is what might happen out there in the other room or the other life, he's actually honored.
Right.
And then guys get competitive.
Yeah. To see who could be the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
And then
I've
by
seen
the
that
end,
too.
guys are crying and they're hugging each other. All it took was a safe place, one guy having the courage to take that risk, and then everyone seeing that it's a different environment and you're actually honored, and guys start to open up. And then, we talk about the physiology, we work with the physiology, and we give them some really simple skills that we just build on through the course of, like, if it's a weekend, a training.
What do you think with our current culture, what are some of the biggest issues that men face? Because it seems like there's a crisis of confidence going on and a lot of kind of misperceptions about what it means to be a man or a strong man. What's your perception on that?
You know, people say, and I've said it, I think it's getting worse. I don't know if it's just, you know, we always say that younger generation is worse. But at one point we were the younger generation too. So I think guys are really hurting. And they're hurting because we're disconnected. We're disconnected from ourselves, and we're disconnected from others. We're disconnected from nature. Maybe we're disconnected from our creator. You know, across the board, we're disconnected. And we have, as our Surgeon General says, an epidemic of isolation and loneliness, and then suicide, where, you know, the statistics are amazing. You know, how many, 80% of the suicides are men, and most of the men that commit suicide, they found, are the guys that didn't have anyone.
Right.
And so, and it just gets, as you know, worse as we get older. So we don't know how to connect in any of those ways. We don't have places that connect because we don't have those institutions any longer to allow for that, to train us, to support us, and to be a venue for connection.
And it seems like the entire current structure of our social structures and our economic structures are almost designed to separate, to keep you on the run, to keep you separate from your family, because you now have to have two wage earners, right? To keep your kids separated from you, to force them to go to school. I mean, these are like our indigenous forefathers would be turning in their graves at what's actually happening. So by offering men an opportunity to come together in a group, you're providing a roadmap, basically, to find that wholeness again.
We provide a roadmap, which is what we call like the MELD method, which is, this method based on physiology, but we also provide environments for men.
They come together in person?
In person and virtual.
And so?
And I started some of the virtual before COVID, but once COVID hit, we went all virtual. And I was actually surprised at how well that worked. I was hesitant, but, and particularly then we sort of had a captive audience too, which launched the other business I had. So yeah, one of the things that we find with guys when they come is they go, I thought I was the only one. And when they hear other guys being real, authentic, or even vulnerable, they start to realize that they're not the only one. But that's how desperate we are, because we're so isolated that we think we're the only ones having these problems.
Can you describe the MELD network, MELD process a little bit more?
Yeah. So what I realized in developing this other business, that I just stepped back and said, what's the natural process of change that someone goes through when they really change in a substantial way? What are the components? And so I just somewhat arbitrarily broke it down to 13 steps. In our core training, which is actually called GROW, this is what we teach in a weekend, one step after another, and then we start combining them. And we start with safety. And then we start teaching guys how to be aware of their own body, because it's my experience or belief that if I'm going to really connect to you, I can't connect to you, Mark, any more than I can connect to myself.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And so we work with both. And so like we'll teach a little concept, little theory, and then we'll demonstrate it. And then we'll put you with two other guys, and you end up rotating around and working on each other. And we just take guys, sometimes literally off the street, no experience. They just show up, and we teach them this method because it's grounded in the physiology. And then they have emotional experiences as a consequence. They really lean in.
Right.
And they realize that this is safe. I can do this. And one of my core things when I teach other men to lead men is don't give them solutions. Don't try to fix them.
Right.
Don't analyze it. Certainly don't judge them. Take the man deeper into his experience. Because it's my experience that, if I can take you deeper into your own experience, you will connect to parts you were disconnected from because of your freeze or disassociation or trauma. And you did what you had to do. And now, what your body, your psyche needs is the reconnection to these parts. IFS, or internal family systems theory, works with parts, and it's a very sophisticated system. Richard Schwartz, we've had him.
I'm familiar with Richard Schwartz.
Yeah, we had him on our program. Great guy. I really respect him. And he just stuck with it when everyone said he was nuts, and now it's a hot therapy. So
So do you get into the stories at all, or is it strictly just helping them feel connected and
we get
safe?
into the stories if it helps them get connected.
If it helps. Okay.
But so often as men, we tell good stories, first to ourselves and to others. And that's all it is.
Right, yeah.
And so like in a group, and you know, if you're telling a story, some guy's going to say, hey, Mark, you're losing me. I don't feel you.
Interesting.
What are you feeling?
Right.
I want to know what you're feeling.
So the story's in your head. It's just a mental representation of some past trauma or victim. Yeah. And so usually the story is going to be like a woe is me flavor to it, right?
Or, you know, how great I am. But it's, you know, we create these stories as coping mechanisms,
Right.
survival things. And I tell guys, look, it's great. You needed to do that to survive.
Right.
But the problem is you want to do more than to survive now.
That's right.
And often our survival strategies become our saboteurs.
That's right. Almost always. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I was reflecting on this. Trauma is actually not the event of trauma. It's the survival strategy that you adopt that creates the ensuing trauma trigger and trauma pattern, or like an algorithm in your body.
Exactly.
Mind. And then, you know, that might serve you for a few days, years, but certainly not 20 years later.
And this is where we get a lot of guys, is probably where it sabotages the most is in their relationships.
Right.
We get a lot of successful entrepreneurs where their survival strategy was part of why they were successful.
Right.
But it's not why their relationship's working.
Yeah. In fact, most peak performers sacrifice connection for performance.
Yeah. And it's sad.
And it is sad. And then they get to the end and they're like, okay, well, I still don't feel whole. So they think, well, maybe I need to do bigger, better, faster, stronger next time. And so they keep on trying to put points on the board, keep on feeling more and more disconnected. We want to be able to perform and be connected.
Yes. And that's my goal.
Right.
And I think we can.
I agree. I mean, I'm so impressed. So you were the founder of Everyman. You had some partners. You mentioned that. I understand. I've been in a couple of businesses where that didn't go well. So my first business blew up, Coronado Brewing Company, because of partnerships. At 71, you basically started over.
Started over at 71. But as we were saying before we got started, I can't put this down.
Right. You can't not do it.
No. I mean, I'm a little weird, but I was thinking about this driving to the airport
Join the club, yeah.
this morning, just about why I'm doing this. And tears were coming to me just thinking about, you know, being in these trainings and groups and just seeing what happens to these guys, you know, and how we've had many a man say, if it wasn't for this group or this work, I would have killed myself.
Wow.
Or, you know, I would have been divorced, or my kids would have disowned me, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this. There's no greater honor in life than to be of value to someone else.
It's amazing. Even if it's just one person.
Yeah.
You can change the world by changing one person.
Guys ask, why guys stay in this? And I think, well, because you know they're way beyond where they wanted to be when they joined the group or whatever. It's because they get to be themselves, and being themselves is a contribution for another man.
Right.
And we don't have any other place.
Imagine folks will stay in for a significant period of time because it becomes their place, their community, their peeps. And similar to like a 12-step program, you then are in service to the new folks, the ones that are struggling.
And you get something from it.
Do you have a kind of a mentorship process or program built into it?
We do. You know, I started it, I mentored them, and I'm not living in Sandpoint anymore. I've been gone for 3 years. The group's going great. They don't need me. And that's what I wanted. Mm-hmm. And guys are stepping up, you know, mentoring other guys. And I created a training they still run. So once or twice a year, they take all the new guys, run them through this 13-week program I created. So the new guys aren't new anymore. And then we put them back into the groups, and these new guys push the old guys.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so we got a community that is a strong community in Sandpoint, a town of like 9,000 that guys, you know, now it's word of mouth, and because they, you know, they go, I want what he has.
Mm-hmm. That's neat. Tell us about, Owen, your personal practices. Like, how do you stay connected? How do you stay open-hearted? How do you stay clear-minded? You know, and the world is moving so fast, right? Like I call it the exponential age, right? And it's going to get hundreds of times faster. Like we're heading into some really interesting times. So what are your practices that you rely on?
Mindfulness, some as a meditation, but more it's just an informal process, and this is what I used to teach when we taught the mindfulness course, was not just learning the skill and practicing as a meditation, but taking it into your day.
Everyday application, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're aware of yourself.
Taking it off the bench. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's an important one.
Right, and so stress doesn't affect me like it used to. I get a lot of body work and other things. I like to cheat. That's one thing that dyslexics do well. We find workarounds.
How do you cheat at body work?
Well, I get body work. I've
I
probably
see.
had thousands of sessions over 50 years.
Do you still do any Rolfing, or is that more of like a one and done type thing?
When I moved to California 3 years ago, I stopped Rolfing people.
Yeah.
I mean, I've Rolfed a few friends, but
Yeah, but personally, do you?
Oh, I get body work, regularly.
Yeah. So Rolfing is something that, like when I did it, it was like 8 sessions or something, super painful, and then it wasn't really any follow up. So, but I thought maybe it was just something you just do once in your life.
Well, that's how I'd sort of tell clients, because I'd take them through the 10, and the biggest problem I had with them, they wanted to keep going. And I go, Mark, you don't need me.
Right.
You really don't need me. Give it 6 months, come back. We'll do a tune-up for a session or 2, or if something happens to you, come back. But go do these other therapies, because it would take 6 months to a year for your body to integrate it.
Right.
But yeah, I like good body work. My body keeps on changing. I like the more deep tissue kind of
Deep tissue,
massage.
yeah.
But I've had all kinds, acupuncture,
I do
cranial.
that twice a week.
You do?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's why you look
It's
so young.
serious downtime. Like I love acupuncture because you literally can't move. And so it's the stillest I am ever, right? Even I'm stiller in acupuncture than I am in meditation.
And
As
you
a
go
whole
into
body, and
you go into a trance state.
Incredible states.
Oh yeah,
Incredible meditation. Sometimes I literally drop into the void. I mean, it's really powerful.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
And I wish more people would do it. Being in nature,
That's a big one for me.
I think nature is the ultimate healer.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of work with
That's
indigenous.
why you live in a beautiful place, probably.
Yes.
You just walk outside and you got the trees and the mountains.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard for me to live in a city.
Yeah, it's hard for me actually because I grew up, as you know, upstate New York in the Adirondacks in the summer. But I live on the Pacific Ocean, so we look out the window and there's the ocean, see the dolphins, and so that that works. That
works. Yes.
Yeah.
When I lived in Idaho, I lived in the forest, so it was easier, and I would do that even if it was just going outside to shovel snow, chop wood.
Just to be outside, yeah.
And I don't do it enough here. We hike a fair amount, often in the Sierras, but yeah.
I mean, so we just grew up taking all that stuff for granted. I mean, you literally can get a certificate now to take people out into the wild. I find that incredible. And they're talking about what's the grounding process that they've named? Earthing.
Well, the scientist that sort of did the research on it is an old friend of mine.
Is he?
What's his name? Oh, it'll come to me in a second. But yeah.
But it seems like that was just like we walked barefoot in California because it just feels good. You feel more grounded.
Well, and then being in the water.
And being in the water, same thing. Grounded, walking on the beach, barefoot. I don't like wearing shoes. Like I'm wearing flip-flops right now. Yeah, so now it's the whole science.
Yeah, they have a science behind it. So what was interesting with this, I'll think of his name in a second, he discovered that lightning charges the earth. And it's, with the negative ions. And so when you're grounding in this way, the negative ions go into your body when you're touching the earth, and that has that healing property.
How? Like, do you know what it's doing? Like, what do the ions
like
do?
you said, that ions in the ocean, the negative ions in the air.
Right. But are they like free radicals cleanuppers?
I think so, but that's the end of my science.
Yeah, getting into stuff. I've already told you more than I know. Yeah. Okay. So time in nature, that's a big one. And it can't be a platitude, right? It means like you go spend some time outside just being present.
Yes.
Right? Like that's mindfulness. A nature walk is mindfulness.
Because you start to, and now there's science that shows this, but you knew this, you start to regulate, like we talked about regulating with people, you start to regulate or connect to nature inherently.
Yeah, and you
slow
start
down.
to literally, your brain waves start to resonate, your heart slows down, heart rate variability. You're getting all of that connection with nature, which is the human body needs that. The human mind needs that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fear for people who live in the big cities and that becomes an addiction too. I remember I lived in Manhattan for 4 years, and most Manhattan people, they would laugh as I said this, that, you step outside the city and suddenly you feel like the world just stopped and you have to get back because you're going to miss something. What are you going to miss? Cars zooming around and lots of noise.
But that's sort of the illusion that we absorb unconsciously, and maybe in some ways now intentionally by certain industries or companies. But yeah, we feel like we're missing something. But our nervous system, even when we think or relax, is upregulated.
Right. I think everyone, not everyone, I shouldn't make that broad a statement, but many Americans are stuck in a state of hyperarousal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I saw some research on this, how your downregulation neurotransmitters can actually get either atrophied or that pathway can get shut off. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Something like that. So you can't actually downregulate.
It gets harder and harder.
Harder and harder. Yeah, you got to do some intervention.
Right, because we know it with our muscles, but what they're finding out with their nerves is, like our muscles, we can reinforce or strengthen or use more neural pathways. And if we don't use another neural pathway, it gets weak. It becomes diminished.
Right.
And that's what, your work, my work, that's what we're doing with people is, in one way, to frame it is that we're training them in new or really old neural pathways to use them. I tell guys, It's like you're right hand dominant. You still got a left hand. You still have all these nerves and these capacities, but you're not using them. They're atrophying.
Right.
And you're really not whole for that reason.
Use it or lose it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that from neuroplasticity, right? So you can retrain your brain at any time, but you've got to keep stimulating those pathways until they really develop. With your men's groups or work, have you seen success with EMDR?
I have. We don't do it. I'm not a therapist. I've tried it. I'm real familiar with it. And I think it's, when done well, a very effective therapy.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that. How about one more? And I had incredible results with a ganglia block, which is simply a Navy SEAL doctor. I don't know where he got this idea, but he knew, the ganglia cell, right? Which is where kind of like fight or flight really is activated. So he injects Novocaine. You inject Novocaine into the base of the ganglia cells. And what it does is again, I'm telling you more than I know, so take this with a grain of salt, but it paralyzes that for several hours. And when it comes back online, it's reset. And suddenly, comes back in its, baseline, regulated, down-regulated state. So it eliminates that. It permanently eliminates the state of hyperarousal.
Wow.
And I did this like a year and a half to 2 years ago, and it was extraordinary, like the profound difference. And I had done I've been meditating since I was 21 and doing breath work and yoga, very, into my body, training somatic work. So I didn't even realize that I was in that hyperarousal. And it was affecting just my whole attitude toward life.
I bet.
So that's something to check,
I've heard of it, and that's all I knew about it. I didn't,
so anyone who's just having a real trouble, I wouldn't say I experienced anxiety, but I was just really intense. And after this, I was much more chill, much more relaxed.
Well, you seem you are very relaxed.
I could be pretty intense too.
But that's good, but you don't want to always be there.
Right.
Like I would tell guys, it's like you got this rig and you stop at a stop sign, you push the clutch in, the engine's still revving.
Right.
And you wouldn't have that with an engine because you'd burn it out. But that's how it is for our nervous systems. And as you said, Mark, we're so accustomed to it ourselves, and everyone around us is like that we think that's normal. But thank God that you had that experience that not only showed you that there was another possibility, but gave you that.
Right. What do you say, let's say a listener who's was inspired by the Navy SEAL version of Mark Divine to listen to this, and even the term vulnerable is just very much of a turnoff. He's like, what are these guys talking about vulnerable? That's not for me. So yeah, how do you frame that? How do we tell that guy hey, you know what? Your idea of being tough is not. Let me tell a real quick story.
Yeah.
When we used to train Navy SEALs, of course, they all believed in, Goggins' story. David Goggins has been Navy SEAL, and he's all just go harder. You got more gas in the tank. Don't quit. Blah blah blah. And so they're trying to be like that, right? And we say to them, listen, if a tsunami's coming, would you rather be the mighty oak or the reed? And they have to think about it, right? Even though it's an obvious answer. And finally they come around to the fact that it's probably a good idea to be the reed because it'll just roll over, and then pop back up after the tsunami, whereas the mighty oak will be just swept downstream or swept inland. And so that's the beginning of our conversation about what mental toughness really is. It's the hard and the soft. It's the yin and the yang. It's the flexibility and the durability. And they have to coexist. So it's not dissimilar to saying you have to be able to upregulate to get ready for a fight and downregulate to calm down and come back into balance. That's the yin and yang. So our culture, though, has this idea of like toxic masculinity. It has to be like all tough, all go, all hard.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that's yin or anything that's soft or anything that's receptive or anything that is less than that is taboo. It's bad. Juju.
Yeah, and it's a couple of things I'd say about that. I think, and I've seen this with all the special ops guys that I've known, is that the vulnerability shows up with how you love your brothers.
Right.
I remember we were doing one training, and it was a team of special forces guys, and the medic said, my goal in life is to give my life to my brothers.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate sign of love, right? If you're willing to lay your life down for someone.
Right. And that's the vulnerability that we're talking about.
Right.
And it doesn't just have to be on the battlefield.
You don't have to have that kind of level of commitment to be vulnerable, right? Just be willing to be in service to somebody else.
But I think the other part of it is, and this is what confuses guys, and it's really not their or our fault, is that we got the schism in masculinity. And that's a word that we never really used, and media, academia uses it, but guys come to us, they don't talk about masculinity, but we'll use that word because that's the word that others use. And we have a continuum. On one side, we got the macho hyper-masculine, and then the other side or end of it, we have the hypo-masculine, which is the sensitive guy.
Right.
And so I literally, when I was younger, had this little book written by a woman on how to be a sensitive man. And I studied it, and I got really good at it. And women loved me.
Right.
Because I was so sensitive.
But it was all a tactic.
It was a tactic, and it was some sincerity. The biggest but was my relationships didn't work.
Interesting.
Because I didn't have a backbone. I didn't realize it then, but in hindsight, when I got into this work, it just dawned on me. And many years ago, I was having a conversation with a girlfriend, and she was escalating her criticisms. And I go, oh no, I'm going to have to say something. Oh, I can't say something, because if I say something, the relationship's going to end. And Owen, you always say something, so you're going to say it, so just say it. And I just relaxed, took the breath, and I'll call her Sue. I said, Sue, what you're saying is not true for me and not true for my part of our relationship. And it was dead silence. It felt like 5 minutes. It was probably 30 seconds. She didn't say anything. And she gets back on the phone and she says, oh, you melted me.
That's awesome. And that was the first time you probably stated a truth like that.
Yeah, and took a risk. And then out of that, I call it assertive vulnerability, because it's bringing in some of the sensitivity and some of that assertiveness of the essence of the good essence of that more hyper masculine. And our normal model of being a man, we don't have that. We don't have the balance of how am I vulnerable? How am I, open and authentic? But at the same time, how can I be assertive when I need to be?
Right.
It's not, and as you said, it's not an either or.
Right. What role does actually testosterone play in this for men? Because as we get older, like testosterone starts to, production gets dramatically reduced, and that affects a lot of things. Mood, it can affect outlook on life. It can affect whether you've got a backbone or not. And, there's some talk about low T men being, kind of that hypersensitive. They do everything for everyone else's needs versus high T men who don't give a shit about anybody else, what they think. Do you get into that at all and look at testosterone levels and
not really
hormone replacement?
Not really. My thought on that is that everything, is a system.
Right.
So in medicine, we often just take a particular thing and look at that, and we often don't really look at it in.
Yeah, you don't look at the whole, just the part.
Yeah, and so what's causing that guy to have low testosterone? And it's usually many
Stress.
things. Stress being the diet,
Right.
lack of all these things we know about. And so when you start addressing it in all those ways, you can change your T levels.
Right.
And so in this culture, we often look at the symptom. We want to just treat the symptom.
Yep.
And sometimes you can do that, but often there's a price you pay for that. And so my whole approach, 50 years of working with people, is okay. That symptoms bringing you in. How can we address it in a way that you heal it, so it's not only sustainable but actually generative, so you keep getting healthier?
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's it's nice to see some movement in that direction with some of the companies doing, precision medicine, holistic integrative health, and looking at the system, the whole system, the whole body. Our obviously mainstream medical establishment is so far, and the pharmacological industry is so far away from that. It's good to see citizen medicine basically popping up through the entrepreneurs, and it's going to ultimately replace that old system, which is broken. You mentioned earlier a stat, which was a little bit disturbing. Suicide's up significantly, especially since COVID. So people are suffering, and 80% are from men. So if someone's listening, or a listener has a friend or a family member who they think is at risk, a man who's at risk, first of all, what do we look for? And then how do we help them?
So we're not a suicide prevention, obviously, but we're, again.
But usually you can see the signs well in advance.
Well, isolation,
right?
That's what the studies were saying. Isolation, and then you get depression, or as Terry Real, this therapist that we've worked with, would say, this sort of aggressive, dominant kind of personality, which is sort of the flip side of depression for guys. So guys generally don't get depressed. I think they're getting more depressed than they ever have been.
They act out instead.
They act out. They come what he calls the grandiose personality, but they're acting out basically. And either they're isolating, getting away from connection, or they're pushing people away because they're acting out so much.
Right.
And what they need is connection. And then, one little thing can flip them out, and they just go down this tunnel, and they just start to feel there's no hope. And so the men that been a part of our groups and trainings that gone down that path, when they started feeling connection with themselves, particularly maybe at first with other men that were, just regular men, not therapists, it's regular guys that you come in like that and I care about you. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I care about you. Maybe I should care about me. And you start to talk to us, and we support you, and we listen, and we're not trying to fix you. We're just listening, and we're as we said earlier, we're taking you deeper into your experience, which is really, I think, where it needs to go, because it's like suicide is the ultimate of leaving our experience that we think that we can't handle, and we think that we have to do life alone.
Right.
And we're not wired to do life alone.
We're not wired to do life alone. I agree with that.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Devine, founder of SealFit and Unbeatable Mind, and I'm super stoked to announce that my new book, Uncommon, is due out from St. Martin's Press this summer, July 16th. And we've launched a pre-order campaign. You can learn more about that at readuncommon.com to try to get early awareness for the book, which I hope will help a lot of people, where I go and do a deep dive on the 5 mountains of personal mastery: physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual. Uncommon, simple principles for an extraordinary life. Check it out at readuncommon.com. And thank you for your support and being part of the change that you want to see in this world. Hoo-yah. Divine out.
So where can folks learn more about the MELD network and connect with you?
It's MELD, MELD .community, spelled out. Okay. That's the best way. Yeah, we have a really awesome 10-week course. So it's online. We just take guys through this program, the basic skills, but everything we do is experiential. Mm-hmm. So they get to, interact with men, which is really where they learn.
Right.
And then we have trainings, and we have other programs that we do.
In that process, are people put into small groups, or are you just part of a big?
Well, you're part of a bigger group, but you're also into small groups. And then when we do our live trainings, you're into the triad. So everything we do has some kind of interactional component to it, because that's where it happens.
What about, so people can reach you directly through that
They
website?
can reach me there.
MELD
Or I
community?
have my own site, owenmarcus.com, but they can reach me through Owen at MELD.community. Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Owen. I really appreciate you coming down and doing this in person. And thank you for the incredible work that you've done and that you're ramping up to do in a bigger way. And I stand by to support in any way that I can.
Well, thank you,
It's
Mark,
huge.
and thank you for the work that you've done in supporting these men, because you have a lot of credibility.
Thanks.
And the work that you've done, and after listening to your book, I really felt your heart and how you really don't just care about people, but really want men to get these other parts of themselves and share them with other men.
Yeah, it's important, right? I say there's not one world out there. It's an 8 billion world, so you got to take responsibility for your world, right? Starts by getting healthy. All right, Owen. Booyah.
Thank you.
Yeah.